Dear colleagues, good time of the day. My name is Darkhan Bilyalov, and some of you I've met, and I hope you're enjoying Vilnius as much as we have enjoyed Kassel last summer. So today I'm going to present, and I'm going to have to reduce my screen size here, and I'm going to present to you on behalf of the team of researchers from the Higher School of Economics in Russia and Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan. And let me just decrease the size of my screen here so you can see my slides. So myself, Darkhan Bilyalov, our colleagues from the Higher School of Economics, Anna Panova and Maria Yudkevich, we were interested in what we call the institutional governance climate. And we were looking at what are the antecedents of institutional governance climate in Kazakhstan and Russian universities. And before we start discussing this, I think it makes sense to give you a little bit of a background about the two countries and why we think they are comparable cases. Okay, so Russia and Kazakhstan are both big countries. Russia is the biggest country in the world. Kazakhstan takes the 9th place. In terms of population, Russia has roughly 146 million people, whereas Kazakhstan has 18 million people. And the official language in Russia is Russian, and in Kazakhstan it's most of the people speak both Kazakh and Russian, Kazakh being a national language and Russian being a language of international communication, what we call. And both countries were formerly a part of the Soviet Union that collapsed, I guess, or dissoluted in 1991. So in terms of higher education context, Russia and Kazakhstan have trying to internationalize for quite a while now, and Russia was ratified the Bologna Declaration back in 2003, whereas Kazakhstan joined the process in 2010. It was the first Central Asian country to do so. Russian system is quite big in comparison to Kazakhstan, and obviously roughly 600 universities with 4.3 million students studying in higher education, whereas in Kazakhstan it's 129, and this is counting the branches of the universities, and about 540,000 students studying in the country. In terms of status, the government basically assigns a different status to universities, and the status distinction of basically a kind of a high status, right, or high status in Russia is those would fall under the category of national research universities and the federal universities. And in Kazakhstan, it's we don't have federal universities, and the system is quite different. But we also have the national universities that are and national research universities that are top universities in the country. And by top, I mean that government, as well as in Russian case, government pays a little bit more attention to them, provides a little bit more funding. They have higher levels of autonomy, which is, I guess, more important for our study here. And in both Russia and Kazakhstan, they share the same history. They share the same higher education system that came from the Soviet Union. But in terms of their development, they basically went different ways. Russia is still a pretty centralized model with reporting to the ministry. And Frumin and Leshukov, I'm sorry here, I used small letters here for the last names. My apologies to those wonderful researchers. They call Frumin and Leshukov. They call Russia one of the most centralized model among comparable countries such as Brazil, for instance, or Canada. And in Kazakhstan, the system tried to give more autonomy to the institutional level. So from a tight ministry control that historically was the highlight of the system, now more decision making is happening at the institutional level through governing boards. And governing boards were also created in Russia, but at a much smaller scale in terms of the numbers of institutions. Whereas in Kazakhstan, every institution, every public institution has a board. And those governing boards were created since 2012, and now they were turned into boards of directors because the legal form of the university, of public university, has changed into non-for-profit joint stock companies. Okay, so this is a little bit of a background, and I think the main idea is that we want to study the favorable governance climate, what we call. Again, this comes from the kind of a shared history and how they developed in different ways in terms of governance. So our research questions are really, what are the antecedents of favorable governance climate in Russia and Kazakhstan? Does the level of departmental, school, and institutional influence result in better perceptions of university governance climate? And does the faculty work structure, and by work structure here we mean how their time is distributed between research, teaching, and service, or administrative work, I guess, how it influences the perception of governance climate in those institutions? And is governance climate better or in Kazakhstan or Russian universities? So really here is comparative question. Which one, in which system, if there's a difference at all, the perceptions are higher of a governance climate in those countries. Okay, so in terms of literature, I'm not going to stop here in too much detail, but we believe that in universities the shared governance is kind of a standard historically, right? But things are changing, and we know that, right? And there's much more corporatization, much more entrepreneurship, much more kind of government influence on how universities run. But shared governance traditionally is critically important to research for your research universities, and it contributes to higher level of faculty, organizational career satisfaction. And they really want, good governance really leads to better retention. And certain leadership styles actually show that, kind of perceptions of have a better impact on job satisfaction, and other things, right? So we know that faculty participation, decision making, it's a highlight of how universities work, right? And through some collegial decision making, universities have been able to be those sustainable institutions that have flourished for centuries, right? Okay, I just want to be mindful of the limitations of time. So data comes from APEC survey. I guess you've heard about it now for several days. And some of you are in the working groups. And one of those aspects that were included in the survey was the governing and management structures of faculty across different types of universities. So what sort of variables that we looked at is first that variable that we call a favorable institutional governance climate, right? Or it's a composite variable made of 4 different questions in the survey in the F section. And this were basically asking the level of agreement with statements about that you have competent leadership in your institution, there's strong emphasis on institutional mission, good communication between management and academics, and collegiality in decision-making process. It was highly reliable scale of alpha level of 0.877. And we also looked at 2 other scales, right? One was the job satisfaction scale, which included employment situation, satisfaction with employment situation, work situation, overall professional environment, also high levels of alpha, and level of influence as well. So level of influence, one of the interesting variables, is basically asking a person the level of their influence at department, school, and university levels. So we use those 3 variables to see how influential a person is as a scale. Okay. So other variables that we included were individual characteristics such as gender, age, professional factors such as discipline, STEM, non-STEM, orientation towards research, and academic rank. The other variables that we looked at were work distribution, and these are hours of teaching, administrative, and research workload. And other ones were those two scales of level of influence and level of job satisfaction. And the last variable was really the country level variable, whether it's Russia or Kazakhstan, also dummy coded. So to go very quickly here through the correlation matrix, since we were doing a hierarchical linear regression, looked at some correlations, of course, firstly, and we see that governance is really has a medium effect and positively correlated with influence scale and satisfaction scale, and it has a small effect of the senior faculty seem to be seem to have be of a less opinion, have a lower opinion about their governance at their institution. So I'm going to remind here again about the models that we use. We have four models here. So we have four models. First model included only individual characteristics and professional factors. So those that are the described faculty. Second model included work distribution and hours, and third model about the perception, the variables of influence and job satisfaction, and the fourth model basically looked at the country difference. So let me quickly go through this model. Model 1 here, as you see, the R squared is pretty low, and none of those beta coefficients really far from zero, except for senior faculty seem to be less satisfied, I guess, or less have a lower opinion of the governance climate in their institution. And model 2 doesn't, you see, adjusted R squared doesn't really improve that much. So really, we're looking at it hours that people spend on doing different things don't really matter much when it comes to governance. Now the model 3, we see how R squared levels jump very high, and there we see some really good beta coefficients here with influence scale and satisfaction scale really showing us some good effect here on governance scale. So in other words, people who are more influential seem to report higher scores on governance, as well as people who are more satisfied with their work seem to be also of a better opinion about the governance at their institution. And in model 4, we added Russia here as a dummy variable, and it seems that in Russia the perceptions of governance are really low than in Kazakhstan. And here we see that over time, I think the gender significance of gender went away on the last model. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to discuss, and just some of the key highlights. First of all, faculty work time distribution is not a good predictor. It doesn't really influence much the levels of governance perceptions. Academics who exert more influence at different levels of institution report more favorable governance perceptions, and senior academics and STEM faculty seem to be scoring low on the favorable governance scale. And also we came to this conclusion that, and the t-tests also support that in fact Kazakhstani academics score higher on favorable governance scale. It's 4.29 versus Russian academics who scored 3.56. There could be several reasons for that. Unfortunately, we don't really have much time to go into that. And thank you very much. I really enjoyed presenting here today and enjoy Vilnius.